In this talk I'm going to discuss rules. And the purpose of rules is to make turning a recording into a runnable script easier. Now, RPT has logic to recognize where URLs come from. They usually come from a page, an HTML page, and to automatically create references in that page, and then to substitute those into the URLs where they're used. But sometimes the pages or the URLs are too tricky for RPT to figure out the substitutions. In those cases, the programmer has to do the substitutions manually. Rules makes that process easier. When editing a script, RPT Rules Wizard remembers some of your actions and can save them as a set of rules. Those rules are not usable as is usually. You do want to look at them and make sure that they are tailored exactly to your needs, but it's a starting point. And then next time you do a recording against the system that you're testing, you can apply those rules to the new script. And the idea is that if you're in development, you get new versions of your software that's under test almost every week, and the systems can change. And if they do change, you might find yourself in a situation where your old recordings and your old scripts don't work anymore. So you have to re-record them, which can be a fairly slow process. And rules avoid steps required that are required from manually editing a script after a recording. Rules cover references, substitutions, data pools, built-in data sources, variable assignments, and custom code. And we'll look at some of those. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to record a new script. First, I'm going to create a new folder to save my rules. I like to save my rules all in one folder. RPT does not create that folder by default for you when you create the workspace, so I create a rules folder. There it is. So now I'll do a new test from recording. Because what RPT does, it has a rules wizard. And while you're recording a test, or while you're scripting it, remember some of your actions, and then when you get done, it asks you if you want to make rules out of those actions. So I'm going to show that. And best practice, as always, is to put a comment. Well, first of all, clear the cache. Best practice is to clear the cache before you record, so that anything that the browser would fetch as a new user, it will fetch. And then put a comment before I do anything. So I'm just going to go to the home page. This is a simple test. I'm going to go to one page, which has a number of URLs on it. And this is a WebSphere portal page. So I'd show that. And I don't have an HTTP server, so I have to use port 10039 to get in. Best practice is to use an HTTP server, but for this demonstration it doesn't really matter. Alright, so there I am, and so now best practice is that I should name the page. And that's the entire test, so I will quit the browser and that will bring up the test. There it is. And if you look closely, you can see that there's a number of substitutions that have not been made. So I'll pick one of those and create a reference and a substitution. And let's pick the welcome page. What I'm going to do is I'm going to search for where that URL came from. Now, the first time in a workspace that you do a search, well, first of all, let me just not search for the whole thing because I'm not sure that that 10039 will be in the page. Well, the first time you do a search, you have to tell RPT that you want to search in HTTP pages, requests and responses, and headers. And so that's what I did there. So I did the search, and since I have the preview pane set, it shows me there. And that looks like it's a link. And it's a link to this URL. So let me go there. And sure enough, that looks like the right place to get this reference from. So what I'll do is I'll create a reference. And I'll give it a name that I can recognize. Welcome CSS href. And then I'll look at the reference properties to make sure that it's exact enough to get a hit. And it's not really. It's finding the 10th href on the page, which is not what you want to have. You want to have a regular expression that's exact enough to find the exact URL that you're trying to get. So I'm going to add welcome page CSS to that and verify it. Now it finds the first one. And the reason for being more exact like that is that you want to be sure that if you get another build next week and it's no longer the 10th reference on the page, it's now the 11th, that it still finds welcome CSS. Alright, so after you create the rule, it asks, do you want to look for a place to substitute that? And I'll say yes. And sure enough, it finds something. Click on that, and if I look at the right view, I can see that it wants to substitute for that welcome page URL. So that is where I want to do the substitution. So I'll say substitute. So now I've created a reference and a substitution. And now when I save the test, it's going to ask me, do you want to save these rules? Do you want to save the reference and substitution that you did as a rule? I'll say yes. And it shows me what it wants to save, and I can select to save those or not. And there's the reference, and it's linked with the substitution, and there's the substitution. So that looks good. I do want to save it. And I want to save it in the rules folder that I created. I give it a name. And then it brings me up to the rules editor. And this is what you see. You see this entire page. And I'll go through some of the fields. So for this reference, first thing that you see is this reference is an HTTP content. Now there are other choices, but typically you use HTTP content. You can be a reference in response header, a status field, type field, or value field. I'm not quite sure what the value field is, but typically you get it out of content. And then it shows you the regular expression. And one of the things I got here is just regular expression validator. That's sort of cool. It's a little box I just pulled down. So what should I do? If I go to the page that has the reference in it and look at it and copy it to the clipboard, so I'll select all and copy it. And now I'm going to go back to the rules and bring up that rules editor, the rules validator. Sure enough, it shows you what it's finding in that page. It actually shows you the whole page, but here it shows you what it's captured. And so this gives you a way of checking, is your regular expression correct? And for example, if I just make that regular expression incorrect, it'll show you the page, but it won't show you that anything's captured. You don't need to use the rules wizard to create rules, and so that's why this is useful. So that's the regular expression that's used for this rule. You get to name the reference, and that shows up in So that shows up in the name of the reference when it's created. You can pick the occurrence that you want to pick. I picked the first one, but there are other options. You can pick the last or random. A star, I think, maybe means all. I'm not really sure. And I think you can type in a number as well. Now there's some advanced options here, and some of these are pretty useful. Create a reference only if used. Will save some space in RPT if you don't create a reference, or if you create a reference but no one uses it, then RPT won't create the reference. This overlapping site action and create reference even if overlapping is very useful when you start cascading rules or you having sets of rules. What I always do is I always replace the existing, and I typically create a reference even if it's overlapping. And the reason is, if I create the rules this way, I can keep RPT's automatically generated rules, but my own rules take precedence. And what's more is, if I have rules, many rules that I've developed over time, I can make it so my newest rules always take precedence over the old ones. The other options here are log level, label, and description, which are useful for debugging. This information shows up in some of the logs. You can set the log level, you can give it a name, a label, and you can type a description there. Right, so let's look at the substitution. You can choose which substitution, where to get the substitution from. Closest is usually best, which means the nearest page. You usually don't have to mess with that. All right, now here's the substitution. And you can see that it comes from, it's being substituted in a URI, but there's other choices. You can substitute into a page or a request header or other things. And here's the regular expression. Now, you see it's got a substitution there. It's got a percent sign, and you can see that the name is Welcome CSS href. And so this is how RPT ties the substitution with the reference. It's got a symbolic name there. And something else that's useful that I just learned about recently is that if you hit Control Space there, it gives you some syntax assist and tells you the things that you can type there. And some of these are RPT specific, and some of them are just regular expression rules, which are fairly complex. And so RPT is giving you a little bit of help about what's valid in a regular expression. One of my favorite things about regular expressions is, if you have a problem that can be solved with a regular expression, now you have two problems, because creating regular expressions can be painful. So this is intended to help. The syntax assist is intended to help. You can name the substitution, and that's useful in debugging. You can decode the field URL encoding on it if you need to. And a couple other options. Conflict action, probably not a bad idea to always replace existing. That means your new rules will take precedence over your older rules if you stack them up right. And I'll try to show that in another lecture. And then some logging information. When RPT runs rules, it keeps a log, and you can look through that log to try to figure out what's going on. Okay, so I've got the rules. They look good. I want to show you something sort of unrelated to this, but I need a script to demonstrate this on, and I don't want to re-record it. So I have the old recording, and I can generate a test from my existing recording. So because the current test that I have already has a substitution in it, I'm going to regenerate the test from my old recording, and that way I have something I can substitute against. Because, like I said, the current test already has a substitution done in it, so it wouldn't be much of a demo. So that little trick, you can generate a test from an existing recording. Alright, so I'm opening the test. Looks very much like the other test, except for one thing, it doesn't have the substitutions done. And you can see that the welcome page CSS is not substituted. And the way that you apply rules is you click that little ruler. You pick which rules you want to run. I don't want to run the built-in data transforms. There's a bunch of them, but I don't want to run them because I'm not using any of those. I say don't clear existing correlations because I like the fact that RPT generates a bunch of references and substitutions automatically, so I don't want to break those. I want to build on those. So I'm going to keep the existing correlation and then apply my own rules, which I then choose. And you can choose your logging. I usually just take the defaults. And I say finish. And it goes in and applies those rules that we had. And there you can see the welcome page now has a substitution because it's in pink. And if we look at it, we can actually verify that it's using the substitution that I suggested. Here's the welcome page. If I hover over it, it tells me it's welcome CSS href, which is what I named it. I can then go to that reference. Looks like the right one. And I can look at the properties, and sure enough, it's my welcome page CSS, first reference on the page. And there you have it. I created rules, and I use them. So to summarize, RPT has logic to recognize where URLs come from and automatically create references and substitutions. But sometimes RPT doesn't get them all, and so it gives you the option to create your own rules. You can use the rules wizard, which I showed here, but you don't really need to use the wizard. You can create your own rules manually. I didn't show that, but you can. And the rules cover references and substitutions, which I demonstrated here. You can also do it with data pools, built-in data sources, variable assignments, and custom code. And it saves you time when you're rescripting because your build has changed. Your system under test has changed. So it's a good thing.